Hello. Yeah, so this is maybe going to be a little bit of an edited talk because Masa just went and I think there's some content that's overlapping. But hopefully the outcome of this is an answer, Arsh, to your questions from yesterday of why should we have on-chain payment at all and like why does that matter? But let me start for paid deals. I don't know if people remember this from the like COVID era of Masayoshi-san and WeWork. I actually would argue this is like DePIN in general, and I think the question is, how do we become this unicorn at the top that crosses the valley of sustainability versus falling into a pit? And I think a lot of that comes down to finding ways that we can actually export the services that we have. Before diving into that, though, I actually want to like maybe make an appeal more directly to storage providers and to talk a little bit about like what does the current market look like, and for them and the pain points that they may see. When we were in Singapore, there was an SP meetup, and a lot of folks were reflecting on how hard it was for them to get financing. And a lot of that came from the shrinking block rewards and people saying that they couldn't find paying customers. And I think like if we were to think about a normal Web 2 business and what are the levers that they have available to them, like typically, I mean, there's a number of levers that you have to go get cash. One part of that is like you could raise money from the private markets through like venture if you're like not launched yet, an IPO, or just generally selling stock to the public markets. But notably, a lot of these options only become possible, especially in Web 2 businesses, once the market sort of like understands what you're doing. And I think it's interesting to look at like the analog of Bitcoin miners and what's going on there, where like a lot of Bitcoin miners are actually like trashed by Wall Street as being really bad businesses, versus MicroStrategy, which I will come to in a second, where MicroStrategy is looked at as a slightly better business, although it's like still a very Bitcoin aligned thing. And a lot of that has to do with MicroStrategy having a revenue stream that's like orthogonal to its like crypto-y business. But second to that is like, if you aren't selling equity, you can also just use debt and credit markets. I tweeted a little while ago about this really great podcast, I probably should have linked it in these slides, from Odd Lots, where Apollo, who's a private equity firm, was talking about their private credit business, specifically targeting data centers. And like, this is interesting in that this is a growing category of financing that exists, but is not probably accessible to most of like the Filecoin ecosystem, primarily because the thing that they look at is just stable cash flows. So like, I think one reason I put MicroStrategy in this slide to begin with is I think for Filecoin miners, it's important to look and think of themselves less like the Bitcoin miners and more like MicroStrategy, where the thing that really matters is that you can build a business that has a stable cash flow, and then on top of that, you can add the asymmetry of crypto on top. And I think that actually is the holy grail of what crypto businesses should look like, because then you can have all of Wall Street and all of the Web 2 people look at your business and underwrite it in a way that they already understand, but that they can slap on the asymmetry of an ecosystem and a portfolio bet, which has the ability to 10, 100x, or whatever else. And that looks dramatically different from any other stable, like just pure cash flowing business that is just a normal data center. So I would argue that this is like the thing that Filecoin miners should keep in their head. I will get to like what are all the things that stop us from getting that grand glorious future, but I want to point out that if we can achieve this, there is a better world that is like possible. Okay, so how does payment on chain fit into this? I think there's a few pieces that sort of matter. So the first is, I think this is actually much more for like the crypto capital markets. This is a very public way of signaling product market fit. Even internally to this ecosystem, we have lots of debates about like what is the demand for Filecoin, not like Filecoin the token, but like the demand for Filecoin services, and is that going up and to the right? I would argue, and I've talked with Jonathan Schwartz and a few other people, if we had one chart as an ecosystem to look at, it would literally just be what is the paid volume of deals in the ecosystem. And then we could all orient our arguments around what is the thing that moves that thing up and to the right. If we don't have that as a chart, there is no way for us to like actually do any sort of like optimization for it. The second I sort of covered in terms of this like fill as a real business plus asymmetry of a token. I think this thesis and like this story for crypto does not exist, but it can't exist for Filecoin unless we actually have a real business. Today we just look like a less efficient version of a proof of stake network. The last is, and this is maybe the other thing that should hopefully be a selfish reason to want payments on chain, is if you can tell this story of rather than just having pure speculative flows that DeFi and whatever else sits on top of, if you can have a real economy with real cash flows coming in, there is a non-linear value accrual story for the token itself. And so This is going to get a little bit later on to some of the concerns I've heard of people about why putting payment information on chain can be scary. But I think one of the claims I want to hopefully justify is if we are able to put payments on chain and we hit certain scales, the value that we will see to Phil itself will go dramatically up because Phil becomes the money inside of this economy that's growing. Secondary to all of that is that there's also the opportunity then for new DeFi opportunities. People have talked about things like factorization, so saying like you as an SP have some stable cash flow, you want an advance against that. You can, like if you're earning 100K a year, maybe someone will give you 90K today and you can just give them automatically through smart contracts the cash flows as they come in. That allows you to buy more hardware, expand your business, have more flexibility in your operations. Those are primitives that can exist. Those are traditional Web 2 like financing options that can be enabled through DeFi and are like actual businesses that could be built. And then I think the last piece here is, again, this makes Filecoin a much more interesting thing in that it is understandable by TradFi. The like translation barrier between what is Filecoin doing and like why Filecoin as an ecosystem is actually much easier to sell versus convincing people that this is like some net new thing. And I would argue what we've seen even with Ethereum and Bitcoin is it's taken them a decade plus to convince like the traditional markets of why we need smart contracts, why crypto should be used for a store of value. This is taking things they already understand and just slapping on like the crypto rails. I also wanted to do a quick aside on Akash because I think in terms of scales of dollars, one of the things that I think people sometimes worry about is like we don't have enough money. Akash actually, I think, is a really interesting case as like a protocol that has some really impressive growth, but in terms of like aggregate dollar volumes, is actually quite small. Like as one of, I would argue, the leading things that's generating revenue in DePIN, this is taken from maybe like a week and a half ago or maybe 2 weeks ago, but like in aggregate, it's like 2 point something million of ARR. It's like actually not that much money. Like that is a few very large enterprise deals. And I would argue the thing that makes Filecoin different is like storage deals are not like spiky. It's not like, oh, there's one bursty amount of compute. It's like these are stable, sticky, recurring revenues that will keep flowing into this economy over many years. This is something that like Filecoin can capitalize on as a narrative if we have it and it's visible and people can make slides like this because the charts are all available on chain. Akash, based on just like this 2 point whatever million in like on-chain revenue, which is going to the supply side, that's justifying a 600 million market cap. It's higher now because everything's up now. But I'd just like to point out that like the scales and the asymmetry of how people value real cash flows is really, really high. Okay, so why pay deals? So I think maybe these have been points that have been made before, but I put this on a slide and I'll just say it so I can make the assertion at some point here. Like Filecoin itself is not sustainable if what we have is just a loop of like print token, sell token, downward pressure, repeat. Like the only way to break that loop is if when you print tokens, it's doing something productive. If you have, or like I've used the phrase before of like we just need to match the currencies. So like we have a fiat expense, we need to match it with a fiat inflow. Like the token expense, like if the token is still staying inside of the economy, we're fine. If Juan's diagram from yesterday works for people, that's great too. But a lot of it is just like we need to have real cash flows coming in to offset the real expenses that we have. I think DePIN in general, like Filecoin is a very strong and large DePIN example, but like DePIN uniquely has the ability to actually bring in external cash flows by building real services. Of course, like we have to monetize those services. John Schwartz had made the comment yesterday about product market fit versus businesses. Like we have to be a business as like an ecosystem, and that means that we have to monetize in some form. The reason on-chain, just to sort of reiterate, on-chain matters for visibility and proof. This is mainly, I would argue, if we're trying to justify it both to ourselves but to like the broader crypto market. Like if we don't have proof that payment is happening, people won't believe it. I have gotten into way too many Twitter arguments to tell you like people just don't believe that Filecoin has any monetizable services. I know there are teams that are monetizing. Like I've talked to CID Gravity about some of their paid customers. We've handed stuff off to Akave, Lighthouse. Like we know there are payments happening, but if I can't show that chart, then people just don't believe that it's true. And like, look, I know that for a lot of it, it might be relatively small scale and it could be scary, but like, or like to show like, hey, we aren't getting like millions of revenue today. I think that's honestly fine. Like we have to start somewhere. And I think like making it a thing that we all orient to and just like forced to look at that number every day will motivate everyone else in the ecosystem to focus on fixing that. I think the other piece, and like this is maybe a little bit more future looking, like in order for us to be able to build these future DeFi businesses, things like lending from the cash flows coming to SPs, like the payment has to be on chain for that to work. If all we're doing is just saying like we're going to use Polygon for payment, which we're then ceding a lot of value to other ecosystems, we're going to use Stripe, like I think it's fine from customer convenience to onboard, but if you use Stripe to pay the miners, then like none of that value flow is coming into the Filecoin economy. All we have is then the sell pressure of the token. And then the last piece is the verifiability. I think this is actually both internal for us and like our ability to know if we have a J curve or not. But like more importantly, when the J curve does like arrive, people can actually trust that it's there. Okay, so I think this is generally what other people have talked about too, but like I think it's worth just calling out that this isn't a singular thing. It's not like, okay, cool, now we just put the payments on chain. There's many things that have to be fixed, and I'm hoping over the course of today we'll like, or the rest of the conference, people will talk about this more. To me, I think this is like where we probably need to come out of Thailand with small working groups that are like hyper-focused on this. There's a product issue here. I think John Schwartz, Eva, and some other people have talked about this in different forms, but I think a lot of this is basically like people understanding why this is an important problem and then some form of commitment engineering to say like, here is some team that is like going to solve this for other people and doing it in a way that's like sufficiently generalized that it works. On the demand gas side, I think we need to think about how can we build more incentives and how can we structure things to basically incentivize more people to look for paying customers. Right now, I actually don't think we have enough people in the ecosystem doing this. I probably would guess it's under like 10. And like, if we actually want to be sustainable, we need to figure out how to grow that dramatically faster. And then there's software engineering gaps. And I think at the beginning of yesterday, when we were doing that giant doc, people were filling out their own versions of this. But I think it all comes down to like, it has to be easy for SPs to just get good and hook into like a pipeline of paying deals. Just to reiterate, like, so the reason all of this stuff matters is I do think like, if we want to have SPs that are super sustainable and are able to cross the chasm and stay alive, a lot of this comes down to just like having businesses that exist. We're able then to like actually access these other types of financing, have people have more levers to pull. And like, honestly, I think this is where I think Hannah in her talk had said like, Filecoin may not be a #1 chain. I actually would take the counter argument to that. I don't know if Filecoin will be a #1 chain, but I think crypto itself has not scratched the surface of what's possible. Like just purely for cloud infrastructure, I think it's like 800 billion in spend a year. Like there is no chain that has $800 billion of buy demand today. If you have $800 billion of like cash flowing in because you have real services that you're exporting, and then you're building all the financing stuff on top, like that is orders of magnitude more than what I think crypto has right now. So just to call out that like, I still think we're very early. A lot of this is like, do we all see the right end state together and are we like working our way there? And hopefully, at least this made the case, and like Arsha, I'd be curious if this like answered for you or you believe it or don't believe it, of like why it matters that we do payments on chain, but also why our chain and not someone else's chain is like a key part of that. And that's kind of all I got.
Questions? Arsh, do you want to?
I didn't mean to call you out. Yeah.
But yeah, I get it. So what are you saying? Sorry, just to... Yeah, thanks, JV. My brain runs at a different frequency than yours, so it's going to take some time. But my point is, I get what you're saying. If we do on-chain payments, number one, like it shows the world that there's real cash flow coming in. It becomes a metric we can track and orient on. Whereas if it's happening off-chain, it's hard to show that to the world and gain value accrual from there. That makes sense. My question was more around the UX of why would a client want to make an on-chain. From an SP side, I get it. There's a pull for on-chain payment because it becomes a metric that they can show to the world and the network can show to the world. My question was more from the client side of, is there a UX need for doing an on-chain payment versus like an off-chain payment? Yeah,
well, I'd be curious what other people think. I actually don't know if every client not necessarily wants to pay on-chain. And I actually don't think that's bad. The Aether guy was up here talking about how they built a whole solution to basically allow enterprise customers who don't want to touch crypto to pay some other entity that then forwards stuff. I think like we should meet customers where they are. I don't think we should add new requirements for how they give us their money. What we care about is like the money eventually coming into the ecosystem. I do think there are certain use cases that do require on-chain payments. There's a team, Tim, I don't know if Tim was talking to this team called Botto that's trying to build like on-chain AI agents. And part of the reason they're interested in working on like Filecoin stuff is like they want the agent to be able to pay and fund its own infrastructure. Like that's not where we are now, but like that is a future people want to build to that does require then on-chain payments. So like I do think there are people who care about this primitives, but we should meet people where they are.
Yeah, I was going to make the same argument of like, there's two classes of users. There's your user who's like not using crypto today that needs an interface whereby they don't have to do that in order to get storage, which is a business opportunity for someone to be like, great, I'll accept your USD, I'll turn it into USDFC, and I'm going to make storage deal, like, add that to the storage deal directly, or great, I am a smart contract or an NFT minting contract or whatever it is that does want to operate in on-chain primitives. I think the thing that we're about to talk about is also about bringing, and that Jennifer was flagging in the beginning, the more that we can enable the network to monitor that the deal SLA or the client expectations and service class that was specified in the deal is being executed and slash the deal and slash the payment. If that isn't executed, then that is serving another value for the client by having their deal be on chain. Because otherwise, I have some off-chain contract whereby I'm paying this storage provider, which has all of this other stuff that I care about, their location, their uptime, their this, that, and the other thing. And if that, I have to now monitor that storage provider directly. And if that storage provider stops doing what I want, like I need to terminate my out-of-band contract with them, maybe take them to court, TBD, all of that other stuff. If I can write that into an on-chain contract where, the network is going to monitor that my deal is being done correctly and slash it if it is not, then that's actually an even more valuable service that by putting my funds on chain, I now have to do less work off chain, and I've now made it programmable.
I want to be careful about, like, I guess what we're saying, but like when we talk about wanting on-chain payments, we're actually talking about many, many different things. One of them you're mentioning is visibility, and you also did mention that people object to that, to their payments being visible. I think that's going to be the bigger problem. I also want to point out that the rest of the world does not work this way. The rest of the world does not make every single payment transparent, and if we think we need to do that, something is terribly wrong. Another thing I do want to point out is in terms of scale. At the end of the day, if we want the system to scale, we can't have every single individual payment be clear and separate on chain. We will have to do a lot of aggregation, and this will make it very difficult to tell what's actually happening. So people will see money moving around, but they will have no idea what it is, if it's real or anything like that, because it'll just be all aggregated and like hidden, basically.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I actually don't think we need every individual line item. I think it's a good point. Like the thing that actually matters and the thing that I think we should orient to is like, what is the question people are trying to answer, which is like, how do we see that there is paid demand for Filecoin services? And I think like that can be a very aggregated number. And I actually think like for a lot of the SPs, if you were to just say even at like an SP level over some like aggregated window of time, doesn't even have to be necessarily at an SP level. If you could say for all deals, this is the total volume of like dollars or fill or whatever,
That might be very, very hard. But I guess the main thing I'm trying to get across here is like I want to make sure that we don't like simplify everything to the meme. Every payment has to be on chain, because if we do, that will make implementing all of this extremely hard and will basically kill us. So I just want to be careful.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair point. I think it's a totally fair point. I think then maybe a better way of framing this is I think we should orient to like what are the questions that people who are external to our ecosystem are trying to answer. How do we make sure that there are things that you could pull off chain that answer that question?
Yeah. I think that if some services have some on-chain fee, that could be used as a signal indicator of usage of the services in Filecoin. So what I'm trying to say, this kind of to answer maybe Steven's question in a way, which is, yes, you could see a lot of volume into Filecoin. It's very hard to say which one is a wash volume, which one is like real volume. But if there is some volume that is paying a fee, well, I don't think it's rational to pay that fee. And so paying the fee will be a great indicator, because all in a sudden you see how many fees have been paid into Filecoin. You can use that as a proxy to say if fee is 1% of the storage, sorry, if the fee is the 1% of the cost, then for a terabyte, then that's how many terabytes you would have, whether they're registered as on-chain deals or out-of-band off-chain deals. So what I'm saying is there are indicators. Some are on-chain, which are the ones that you're mentioning. Some are still on-chain, but of things that might have happened off-chain. And by that I mean, if there is X many people that paid the on-chain fees for onboarding storage, then it is an indication that people have onboarded some amount of storage. Otherwise, they would not have paid these fees.
I think that's right. I guess so there's two different things. So I do think it is important that we think just about so what is the chart that we want to show at the end? Because I do think this is actually much more powerful in terms of being able to say there is some aggregated view of here's the total, because most people aren't thinking that deeply about it. And so how we get to an end state of this, I actually am much less opinionated. I'm more trying to anchor on the simplicity of these types of charts are really important. And then I think over time, the other thing that we just want to have an eye to is so what are the downstream use cases that we don't want to make not possible? Because I do think long-term, if I'm a Filecoin value maxi, if we want to make Filecoin maximally valuable, I do think we don't want to see, or I think it would be bad if we seeded things that whole factorization market or whatever outside of the Filecoin economy. And I think there's a unique opportunity for the fact that SPs are on-chain businesses. They exist as first-class entities. You can wrap them in smart contracts and all of that stuff. But that might be two tiers of a debate where maybe we agree on one, maybe I don't actually know if we agree or disagree on two, but yeah, that is my claim at least.
Markets do what is rational for them, and I think the Filecoin network should do what is rational for us, which is if there is an on-chain market, that's great. And if there is an off-chain market, we better take a small fee out of that. And then we can create nice diagrams. One that is on-chain deals, and one is the projected off-chain deals.
The third, which is the revenue.
Yes.
And a third that is the revenue earned by the network for all of those deals based on fees.
Yes.
Yeah, I think a theme that we've been discussing as well is kind of all the downstream services that would potentially get unlocked that could get orchestrated behind some form of a contract where you deposit a fee to then have the network coordinate the any PDP stuff, any stuff related to retrieval testing, any quality of service assessments, and so on. So if you're able to package these things up, and the deal is actually happening off-chain itself, so the storage is actually, the payment for the storage is happening off-chain, but then there is the only way to get access to this kind of suite of services that the network is composing for you and kind of giving you that continuous confirmation that the deal and the storage provider and so on are live and healthy. The only way to secure access to that is by depositing a fee for those services specifically. I think that could be a proxy, and it's less invasive than kind of having or forcing somebody to just pay you a cut just because there is a deal that happen off-chain, but you want to have some record of it on-chain, and then there's actually, I think that payment needs to unlock some fundamental functionality, basically.
Actually, so I'd be curious for the folks who are saying payment off-chain, can you just be specific about what is the version of that you sort of envision? When you say payment off-chain, are you saying we basically do this vouchery type thing that I think I've seen people talk about with payment channels? Are you saying specifically you should be able to pay on Polygon and do stuff there, yeah?
Let's start from the fact that I am an on-chain maximalist, meaning I want to have everything on-chain, and I'm going to say things that I may disagree that they are happening off-chain, but they're happening on-chain, and we need to be aware of. For off-chain deals, I mean all of the deals that happen outside of the Filecoin chain, meaning through phone calls, through layer 2s that don't record the deals on-chain, or through legal contracts and so on. So these are happening, and there is a way for which, if you're using capacity with data into Filecoin, you could charge a fee, which we call onboarding fee. This is a proposal in the making for a few years because we don't really know how to make this in the right way. But if we were to do that, then we would be able to charge for Filecoin usage that is not recorded on-chain.
I see. Yeah, so I think it's a good thing to bring up. I think maybe the point I'm making is slightly separate, so it's not in contention with that. Like, if I actually can leave one note for the SPs, the thing I would call out is like actually the nonlinearity of the total dollar volume. Like, someone was asking like, why should people want to pay on chain? And I would say like the giant gap in that ratio between the total dollar daily spend and the market cap is the thing that matters. Like, all SPs have at least one revenue stream, which is block rewards, and hopefully two if they're getting paid dollars. And like, yes, you are seeding some private information to put some amount of that dollar flow on chain, but like collectively, if someone had $10 million to like buy Phil, that would actually be way less impactful than like buying $10 million worth of paid storage deals and settling it on chain, is I guess the net point I'm trying to make.
Is there a ratio that you have in mind that is a standard market ratio? I do, but for volume transacted and market cap of a token, or fees burned and market cap of a token?
I have a directional heuristic. I don't have a formal number, but it's like, I can tell you right now, I don't think any DePIN network is generating more than eight figures of revenue. And like the top DePIN networks, excluding us and all, are like in the 9 figures of market cap. So like that gives you at least some sense of, it's like 2 orders of magnitude is like the multiple people are giving.
Cool. Thank you, JV. We are going to wrap up this session.
I think I'm also the next one.